In our previous episode, we tracked a mystery that led us away from the traditional Sinai Peninsula. We followed the evidence across the deep crystalline waters of the Gulf of Aqaba and set foot on the rugged, scorched earth of northwestern Saudi Arabia. We have found where. But as we stand at the base of these mountains, preparing to follow the Israelites into the heart of Midian, we must confront the how. How does a group of this magnitude move through a landscape this unforgiving? To understand the sheer scale of the nation we are following, we have to look back to the very beginning of the story. The biblical narrative is precise about its origins. This entire saga, which would eventually challenge the greatest empire on earth, began with just 70 individuals. 70 ancestors, the family of Jacob, entered Egypt as refugees to escape a global famine. For 430 years, these families lived in the land of Goshen. According to the text, what happened during those 4 centuries was nothing short of a demographic miracle. In 430 years, the 70 ancestors didn't just survive, they exploded. They transformed from a small, vulnerable clan into a massive, structured nation that rivaled the ancient world's regional superpowers. But when we reach the Book of Numbers, we are presented with a figure that has sparked debate for millennia. It is a number that sits at the center of the Exodus mystery. The Book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 46 says, "All the men of Israel, 20 years old or more, who were able to serve in the army were counted. The total number was 603,550. 603,550 fighting men. This is the core data point. But we must realize that in the ancient world, men of military age was a demographic shorthand. When you add the women, the children, the elderly, and the mixed multitude that left Egypt with them, the total population balloons to over 2 million, possibly 3 million people. To put this in perspective, a literal interpretation of this figure yields a series of staggering physical, biological, and archaeological challenges. Let us look first at the physics of survival. And we are in a hyper-arid desert environment. In the wilderness of Midian and Sinai, water is not a luxury, it is life. A literal population of nearly 3 million people would require up to 10 million liters of water every single day. Even at the Great Springs of Kadesh Barnea, the natural output would be a mere fraction of what is required to sustain such a host. Then, there is the question of movement. If you imagine a column of 2 million people marching 10 abreast in an organized fashion, that line would stretch between 150 and 800 miles long. Think about that distance. It creates a biological paradox. The vanguard of the nation would be reaching the mountains of Saudi Arabia, while the rearguard was still packing their bags in the land of Goshen. To truly understand this scale, we must move from math to history. We must compare this biblical census to the actual historically verified military deployments of the 13th century BCE. The Egyptian military during the New Kingdom was the gold standard of professional warfare. Yet, at the absolute zenith of Egyptian power, the monumental Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, Pharaoh Ramesses II could only deploy an expeditionary force of roughly 20,000 to 25,000 soldiers. On the opposing side, the massive Hittite coalition, a gathering of several nations, numbered only about 47,000. If the Israelite force genuinely numbered over 600,000 armed men, it would have been 15 times larger than the standing army of the entire Egyptian empire. It would have been 12 times larger than the combined forces of the Hittite coalition. This was not a group of refugees, it was a demographic tsunami. A force of this size wouldn't just have survived the desert. It possessed the mass to conquer the entire ancient Near East in a single season.
And yet the text itself offers us clues that the numbers might be doing something else. Take, for example, the tribe of Simeon. In the first census, they are recorded as a formidable force of 59,300 men, But 40 years later, in the second census, their number plummets to just 22,200. If these are literal statistics, Simeon suffered a 60% population collapse. But notice the numbers themselves. The recurring use of 300, 400, and 500 suggests we might be looking at rhetorical poetry. In the ancient Near East, numbers were often used to project status, divine favor, and spiritual standing rather than raw administrative data. The Simeon shift might be telling us about the tribe's honor or their failure rather than just their head count.
Beyond the military charts, we face perhaps the most difficult paradox of all, the biological paradox of the firstborn. In Numbers chapter 3, the text records a very specific tally. It orders a count of all firstborn Israelite males aged 1 month and older. The reported total is precisely 22,273.
At first glance, this seems like a simple record, but when you contextualize that number against an adult male fighting force of 603,000, the demographic math collapses. A military force of that size implies a total male population, including infants and the elderly, of over 1 million. If there are only 22,000 firstborn males in a population of 1 million males, the ratio is 1 firstborn for every 50 males.
Biologically, this is impossible. Every mother has exactly 1 firstborn child. For this ratio to hold true, the average Israelite mother would have had to give birth to roughly 50 male children. This implies an average family size of nearly 100 children per woman. How do we reconcile these impossible figures? How do we find the truth in a story that seems to contradict the very laws of biology and logistics? The answer may be hidden in plain sight, within a single Hebrew word, Aleph.
The word Aleph is the hinge upon which the entire debate swings. Traditionally, it is translated as 1,000. But in the context of an ancient military census or a tribal list, Aleph has a second equally valid meaning. It can signify a clan, a tent group, or a military unit. Look at how different Bible versions handle Aleph when the context is social rather than mathematical. In Judges 6:15, in the King James Version, Gideon says his 1,000 is the weakest. The NIV, ESV, and NLT all translate it as clan. Why? Because a literal 1,000 people wouldn't be a weak family, it would be a small army. We see this again in Micah 5:2. The prophecy says Bethlehem is small among the 1,000 of Judah in the KJV and NIV. But versions like the ESV and Berean Study Bible translate this as clans or families. Even in the story of David and Goliath, when Jesse sends David to the battle lines, he tells him to bring cheese to the commander of the unit. The Hebrew word there is, again, Aleph. David wasn't visiting a massive army of thousands, he was looking for his brother's specific military division. In this scene, the King James Version and the New King James Version say, "Carry them quickly to the camp, to the captain of their 1,000. NRSV says, "Take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their group." CSB says, "Take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit."
If we re-examine the census through this linguistic lens, the tribe of Judah doesn't have 74,600 soldiers. Instead, Judah has 74 units, 74 Aleph, and 600 men. When you apply this across all 12 tribes, the sea of millions vanishes. In its place, we find a structured and potent fighting force of approximately 5,550 men, organized into nearly 600 units. The total population is recalibrated to a manageable, plausible range of 20,000 to 30,000 people. Suddenly, the story becomes grounded in reality. This smaller group fits the water output of the desert springs. It matches the military scale of the Egyptians and the Hittites. And it perfectly resolves the firstborn paradox, restoring a natural family ratio of roughly 1 firstborn for every 4 or 5 males. Yet even this elegant solution faces a challenge posed by the text itself. Deuteronomy 7:1 says, When the Lord your God brings you into the land, He will drive out before you 7 nations, larger and stronger than you. If Israel were a nation of 3 million people, this statement implies that the 7 nations of Canaan had a combined population of over 20 million. Archaeology tells us that the land of Canaan in the late Bronze Age could not have supported a fraction of that number. We are left with a choice of perspectives. The literal view sees a massive, supernatural miracle of growth and sustenance. The rhetorical view sees numbers as symbols of divine favor. And the linguistic view sees a historically plausible military record. What all these voices agree on is that the census was not meant for a spreadsheet. It was meant to define Israel as a holy host, an organized community built around a sacred center. They were no longer a collection of slaves. They were a nation. As we close this chapter on the impossible census, we look toward the horizon. The journey from the Red Sea is complete. The people have arrived at the base of the peak. In our next episode, we will step inside the most transformative period of the Exodus. 11 months of law, construction, and divine presence. Next time, we will see Episode 3, 11 Months at the Mountain.